A good portion of the stories about gamesters and the scoundrels of the Old West center on the male-dominated profession of being a gambler. While it makes sense in regards to the culture and lifestyle of gender roles in the 19th century, it didn't mean there were no savvy women of the West making a name for themselves in the land of folk looking to get rich quick. As an effort to dive deeper into the lives of female gamblers and the origins of their risky behavior, here's the next video in a series detailing infamous women of the Wild West who acted as gamesters in the heyday of poker and faro on the American frontier. Introducing Eleanor Dumont, better known as Madame Mustache, and the first professional female blackjack dealer in all the West. Eleanor Alphonsine Dumont first made her claim to fame on the California coasts, in the seedy underbelly in the streets of San Francisco. Before her rise through the ranks of top card players in the city, though, she came from a land far from the vices of a still-developing Golden State. Much of her early life remains in the shadows, but it's widely accepted that Eleanor Dumont was not the name given to her at birth. The few documents historians do have access to suggest that the woman later known as Madame Mustache was first born as Simone Jules. It's estimated that her birth came circa 1829, and her parents were probably of a French Creole background, hailing from New Orleans, Louisiana. Why would Simone Jules then depart her home and change her name is anyone's best guess, but it's more likely than not related to her masquerading personality of a Francophile. It's said she loved her French to the point it directly influenced her day-to-day appearance. She dressed to impress, mimicking the burgeoning styles of similarly adorned women of the West at the time. This admiration of frontierswomen is the leading theory as to why Simone picked such an obviously French alias and fled west. She arrived at the height of the California gold rush and never looked back. From 1849 until the day she drew her last breath, she'd be forever immortalized as one Eleanor Dumont. Miss Dumont's first stop on her tour of the American West came in the aforementioned City by the Bay. She arrived in her early 20s, her striking appearance and inviting yet enigmatic eyes, fooling those who didn't believe that she meant business. It didn't take long before she was known in San Francisco for her uncanny skills at a card game called 21. First called 21, the origin of 21 is a hotly contested topic amongst historians. For many, it's accepted that it first grew in popularity in 18th century France, due to it being mentioned in the world-renowned novel Don Quixote. French colonists brought the card game over to the United States during their colonization in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, before it boomed out west with the proliferation of gambling halls and wagering saloons. With 21's popularity amongst the French, and specifically as a staple in New Orleans, it's believed Dumont arrived in San Francisco already wielding the 21 know-how. Displaying an uncanny wit and undeniable skill, Dumont eventually secured employment at the Bella Union. The Union was a saloon found in the heart of the Barbary Coast district of San Francisco, but never before had a woman worked as a dealer at one of its vaunted card tables. Dumont quickly gained the reputation of being standoffish, aloof in the midst of men ignorant to respectable behavior. They saw her as part of the entertainment. She saw the boys as nothing more than that, boys. Eventually, though, the 21 prodigy was no longer welcome at the Bella Union. Dumont was rumored to be a card sharp behind closed doors, but the gossip quickly materialized as fact. She was let go of her employment and encouraged to leave San Francisco before the heat caught up with her. Luckily for Dumont, moving was no issue. She had amassed a small savings with the money made off her winning streaks, and knew she could essentially go wherever her heart desired. Thus, she packed up and moved north to Nevada City, California, a growing mining camp turned bustling settlement. Upon her arrival, Dumont was assisted by two youthful miners, who were both shocked and starstruck by a mysterious woman appearing out of what felt like thin air. They carried her parcels into Phepps Hotel at the center of town and watched her as she checked in, using the name Eleanor Alphonsine Dumont for what was probably the first time. In the following days, the lady gambler meandered up and down Broad Street, explaining herself or her situation to nobody. She left the mining community perplexed, as many a resident watched as she peered into windows of empty buildings. It stirred up quite the gossip in Nevada City. Dumont back to where she left off in San Francisco. This time, however, she was just getting started. Days after her curious parade around the streets of Nevada City, the Nevada Daily Transcript editor, Edwin G. Waite, received a handbill from Dumont, alerting the paper of the upcoming grand opening of 21, the name of her very own saloon and gambling establishment. Within months, 21 was up and running, and the financial successes resaturated the life of Eleanor Dumont. She was known for her strict but savvy rules at the establishment. Patrons were required to dress to the nines, there was no cursing allowed, but the champagne was free. Most importantly of all, no women were allowed. The lady gambler was the only one allowed within the walls of 21. It gave her a leg up on those who sought refuge at the saloon. She'd flirt with and smile at the men as they walked through the door, but at the tables, she was a blank page in a book with no title. The mysterious demeanor put on by Dumont certainly didn't curtail the profits. Business was booming before long, with minors of all ages spending what little change they had at various card games. Taro was the most popular, but 21 remained the most intriguing. Most of the men didn't want to play unless the madam herself was dealing, everyone hoping to give their best attempts at seducing the forbidding femme fatale. It was all a desperate act of futility, however, with their bids at attention resulting in no dice, both literally and figuratively. While Dumont's reminders that her establishment was no place for womanizers echoed through the rafters of 21, she wasn't completely without male partnership herself. Her first foray with teaming up alongside another man came in the late 1850s, when she met David Tobin. Tobin came to Nevada City and quickly became smitten by Miss Dumont, not unlike every single other man who walked those lonely streets. Tobin was a New York businessman and an accomplished gambler, the perfect fit for a potential associate. Together, the unlikely pair planned and brought to life an establishment of their own, called Dumont's Palace. The Palace was a jack-of-all-trades gaming and card outfit, in tune with the growing gambling scene both in and out of Nevada City. Their games of notoriety were Faro and Chuck-a-Luck, a carnival-inspired three-dice game of chance, also called Sweat Rag or Birdcage over the years. Dumont's Palace was a smashing success, but a short-lived one at that. Not too long after Tobin and the eponymous lady gambler saw their spoils arrive, they watched it all get washed away, departing along with the rest of the luckless miners. The heyday of the California gold rush had abruptly met its end, and Dumont sensed it was time to seek out greener pastures. Thus, in 1859, she sold her two prized establishments, the Palace and 21, leaving Tobin behind as a business partner altogether. Her first stop on the next exodus was in Columbia, California. The town featured very little opportunities to gamble, but Dumont was dead set on reviving her favorite pastime. With permission, she opened a table at a local hotel, but found the patronage lacking compared to Nevada City. Unwilling to give up life as a gambler, Dumont continued on, masquerading as a wagering francophile across the frontier. She set up shop in locales as infamous as Tombstone, Arizona, or Deadwood, South Dakota. But she also went to more subtle settlements in cities such as Pioche, Nevada, and Silver City, Idaho. One such legend goes that Dumont caused quite the stir on one specific excursion through the Northern Hemisphere. After going broke and in search of a profitable boomtown, she spent a short stint in British Columbia before departing for the high plains via steamboat. During the trip, Dumont caught wind that many of her fellow passengers were sickened with smallpox, the steamboat a one-stop shop for harboring disease. Not wanting to put her plans in jeopardy, the lady gambler was left with only one choice. Loading up her gun, she paid a visit to the hapless steamboat captain. Holding him hostage at gunpoint, Dumont demanded that they dock at the nearest locale, with nary a passenger approaching her. The locale in question turned out to be none other than Fort Benton, Montana, and after facetiously waving the smallpox-ridden steamboat goodbye, she got right to work, making her mark on Big Sky Country. As Dumont introduced herself to Montana, the folks in Fort Benton and beyond introduced themselves right back. It was the colorful characters holed up in the treasure state that gave the lady gambler her infamous nickname, Madame Mustache. You see, in her older years, Dumont featured a noticeable stretch of hair above her upper lip. The men at her card tables took notice too, and took no shame in mentioning it when the results didn't go their way. It's said that one night, during a game of 21, one of the male patrons had lost all of the money he had. In her usual tradition, Dumont would pour the loser a tall glass of milk. On this occasion, the unfortunate son had no time for traditions, and was rather insulted by the milk. In turn, he attempted to insult the madam herself, bestowing her with the mustached moniker. Legend goes that while the sobriquet stuck, it never amused the lady gambler herself. It's said that Dumont was disgruntled, and maybe a tinge embarrassed by it all. Nevertheless, she knew that once word spread, she'd have to stick with a new name to ensure business continued to break positive. Whether it happened before or after Madame Mustache, Dumont gave meaning to her title of Madame, down to a T. While frequenting Big Sky Country, she set up shop in Bannock, Montana, becoming the madam of a brothel, both there and in Fort Benton. The folklore lends many stories of Dumont opening up brothels in all the cities she moved to, but the ones in Montana were especially popular. She held high standards for her women, requiring them to dress lavishly every day, much like she did herself in the early days of her frontier enterprise. When it was time to market her brothel services, she'd take the well-clad sex workers and show them off to the town in the middle of the day. Shining, shimmering carriages with ornate decorations transported the brimming, beautiful women, much to the horror of regular citizens. Onlookers would gasp and run to their children, covering their eyes while shooting darts at Dumont and company. Of course, the haphazard nature of temporary brothels and gambling houses made living in temporary settlements all the more unpredictable. Eventually, Dumont recognized the on-the-go lifestyle wasn't for her anymore, and soon thereafter, she saw a decline in her once intriguing one-woman show. Upon reaching her middle-aged years, Eleanor Dumont recognized that she was yearning for a time that had long passed her by. The days of enticing and distracting men with her good looks and high fashion were over, and the days of less than impressive nicknames and fading beauty had arrived. Father Time has remained undefeated after all, even on a frontier seemingly frozen in everyone's memory. As such, she looked out on the western landscape and was inspired to do the very thing that the frontier was known for, homesteading on a ranch all to herself. Dumont was far from being any sort of horse whisperer, and certainly knew next to nothing about raising livestock or building a home. But when she had her mind set on something, it was near impossible to persuade her off of it. Thus, she bought an open ranch near Carson City, Nevada, and looked to prove wrong those who doubted. Not long after a retreat to Carson City, Dumont finally found the love of her life after years of beguiling men without the romantic reciprocation. Jack McKnight, a self-proclaimed cattle driver, swept Madame Mustache off her feet with the smooth-talking banter and handsome good looks. He dressed to the nines as well, and by all intents and purposes, was the perfect man for a lady such as Eleanor Dumont. Like many tragic love stories saturating the western frontier though, the lust lasted barely a year. It turned out McKnight was nothing more than a conman and wannabe outlaw. One day he up and left, taking the entirety of Dumont's life savings with him. He even sold off the ranch and steeped her in a tremendous amount of debt to boot. In a matter of months, she was left with nothing but the clothes on her back. Dumont was furious and promised revenge against the conniving desperado. She acquired a horse, retrieved her double-barrel shotgun out of storage, and set out on the road to revenge. After tracking him not far into the neighboring territory, legend goes, Madame Mustache cornered McKnight and wasted no time in acquiring her vengeance. All it took was one pull of the trigger and a single shot to the chest. McKnight was murdered, and Dumont quickly fled back to Carson City. Without any witnesses, it was impossible to pin the murder on Eleanor Dumont, and the case went cold. Without an arrest, but with suspicions slowly enveloping her, the lady gambler knew it was time to split. If anything, McKnight's scheme was a sign from God that Dumont was better served doing the things that she became known for anyway. Tending to animals in a ranch were obviously beyond her skill set, and now, without any farmland or finances to justify it, she left in the thick of night, only to return to the world of brothels and betting. After another tour through legendary establishments, such as the aforementioned Tombstone in Deadwood, where it said that she taught Calamity Jane how to gamble, she eventually made her last stop in Bodie, California. Back in the Pacific Coast region that she first frequented in 1849, it was now almost 30 years since her initial frontier quest. And yet, nothing about her had changed, save for the mustache on her lip and nickname branded on her legacy. It was May of 1878, and the arrival of Madame Mustache didn't go over the heads of the Bodie locals. One reporter saw her return as the perfect chum for her story, and published the following quip in the newspaper. Madame Mustache, whose real name is Eleanor, has settled for a time in Bodie following her old avocation of dealing 21, faro, etc., as force of circumstances seem to demand. Probably no woman on the coast is better known. She appears as young as ever, and those who knew her ever so many years ago would instantly recognize her now. However, the reporter was anything but accurate. The truth of the matter was, Dumont returned to the West Coast without the same appearance or spirit that her younger self was known to have. She may have started off on the right note, making enough money to recover from the McKnight ordeal, but it wasn't enough to last her into the sunset. A year later, in early September of 1879, Dumont asked a local friend to spot her $300 for the evening's table. The friend obliged, but it didn't take much time for Madame Mustache to realize it was all for naught. Luck went by the wayside that night, and before long, Dumont was out of money. Straddled with triple-digit debt and years of lamenting her decline, it was enough to push her over the edge. Without as much as saying a word, Dumont wrote up a letter goodbye and paid a visit to the local apothecary. She got her hands on a lethal dose of morphine and combined it with the finest bottle of red wine in her possession. She then walked a mile into the open desert, drank the deadly concoction, and fell to the ground. The following day, on September 9th, a shepherd tending to a sheep flock discovered the body of Eleanor Dumont, abandoned just 100 yards away from the nearby Bridgeport Road. Next to her was an empty bottle that reeked of morphine, and back at her residence was a note informing the reader she had grown tired of life. As a result, the coroner officially ruled the death a suicide. As her death reached the gossip chains of the Old West, whether it by news publication or oral tradition, words of gratitude and admiration for Madame Mustache poured in. One telegraph, alerting settlements of her demise, stated as followed. Bodie, California. The Free Press thus alludes to the death of a character well known. The inquest of the body of Eleanor Dumont took place this afternoon at 3 o'clock. The drug used by the unfortunate woman in taking her life was morphine. Dr. Rowe analyzed the contents of the bottle found by her side, and it proved to be a mixture of claret wine and the above narcotic. The Bodie Morning News ended their obituary with the following quote: "The history connected with the unfortunate suicide is but a repetition of that of many others who have followed the life of a female gambler, with the exception, perhaps, that the subject of this item bore a character for virtue, possessed by few in her line. To the good-hearted women of the town must we accord praise for their accustomed kindness in doing all their power to prepare the unfortunate woman's body for burial." Even one anonymous gambler was quoted with nothing but positive remarks, stating, "Her life was as square a game as was ever dealt. The world played against her with all sorts of combinations, but she generally beat it. The turn was called on her at last, for a few paltry hundred. She missed the turn. None of the old boys were there to cover the bet for her, and she passed in her checks, game to the last. Poor Madame Mustache." The town of Bodie raised funds for a proper funeral, and folks showed up to pay their respects for the lady gambler in the hundreds. They spoke about her fairness and intelligence, highlighting the fact she was so kind to those who lost, empathizing with the common man, while never embarrassing them with intent. Her legacy became that of a brilliant businesswoman and advocate for everyday people. She was known to feed the hungry and house the homeless. Even though the pearl clutchers looked upon her madamehood as a disgrace, she helped many single women find employment in the West. She entertained thousands and helped struggling mining camps find a light in a land devoid of much luminance. Sure, her life was centered on the vices, and gambling addictions should never be celebrated. But beyond the legacy of popularizing blackjack, or cold-blooded vengeance, or unexpected suicide, Eleanor Dumont made the Western frontier what it is today. You may not approve of it, but history pays you no mind. The Old West simply isn't what it is today, without folks like Madame Mustache.